she says.
Now, as is usually the case around this time, the Premier of Gauteng, David Makhura, has indeed delivered his State of the Province address. My colleague Natasha Phiri has also caught up with the Premier and is with him right now. Natasha, certainly a speech that perhaps needed a little more definition. Coronavirus, of course, still taking the bulk of the address as well today.
Definitely, Arabile. The Premier there has just concluded his State of the Province address, which is actually informed by President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. And as you know, that national government has actually waged a war on, the novel coronavirus, which has ravaged the lives of and livelihoods of South Africans. But coming to the State of the Province address, same thing. Premier Makhura there waging a battle against COVID-19, prioritizing the issue of this virus, and also his other key priorities is to reignite the Gauteng economy, recalibrate social policy, and improving governance. But I'm actually joined by various leaders of the opposition parties here in legislation. Let's just actually gauge their sentiments, what they think about this. Mr. Msimanga, thank you so much for joining us on SABC. Always a pleasure having you. In a nutshell, what do you think about the Premier's speech? It's quite alarming that he said nothing about e-tolls. I mean, in 2019, I remember vividly, he had said in a whole pact at the Soweto UJ campus that e-tolls had no future in Gauteng, but now seemingly a U-turn?
Well, not a single word on the issue of e-tolls, as was expected, because for the last 3 years, they actually been at the forefront of saying the e-tolls, and I quote what he said, have no place in Gauteng. Now, we have seen the previous 2 weeks the publication or the gazetting of the new tariffs, which then tells us that the e-tolls are here to stay. That makes Makhura a bit of a liar. Because he says he was going to fight tooth and nail, and yet he said absolutely nothing today. But we're not surprised, with what we've heard so far. One, he said to us that we are going to get the Gauteng Bank. He said that for the previous 4 years, and not a single word on that. Instead, today he's trying to reintroduce the topic again by saying we are going to look at revitalizing the funding of township businesses, which is something that, for me, is the reintroduction of a already failed plan to have a state bank or to have a provincial bank. He then goes on to talk about corruption as if corruption came with COVID-19. This is a problem that has been systematic in the departments. This is a problem that has been there forever and in a day. What COVID has done is to just highlight the rot that is there in government. And this is why we have said they are not fit to govern. They should have gotten rid of all this, the officials, especially in his office, because in his office it has been said now in the tribunal that somebody in there had been trying to influence the awarding of PPE tenders. He's talking about the pains that the people of Gauteng are feeling. The pain of the people of Gauteng are feeling is that inflated prices have gone into the pocket of the politically connected instead of going towards buying PPE. In pain is when you know that more and more lives are lost, especially those of nurses and doctors and policemen that we were asked to stand and give some ovation to today. Those people that are still asking, where is our protective clothing? But we have lost so many millions, if not billions, towards corruption. We're hearing about the 2.2 billion. Not a single word has been said about the 2.2 billion rand that has been lost towards corruption here in Gauteng alone between last year in March and this year right now. So these are things that, Makhura should have spoken about and said absolutely nothing on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Msimang. If I'll just quickly bring in the ANC there, Mr. Mzikumalo. We've just heard your colleague here, Mr. Solim Simanga of the DA, who's, quite, not impressed about the State of the Province address. I mean, as the ANC, your sentiments as well. We heard the Premier touching on the issue of corruption. He himself, there have been recent calls for the Premier to step aside because he's been also fingered in alleged PPE corruption. We saw last year the MEC of Health, Bandile Mazuku, was sacked from his position over such things. So, I mean, as the ANC, what are your sentiments?
The first thing we want to say is the African National Congress that we want to pass a vote of confidence to the Premier and his cabinet. We think they've done a good work on a number of issues. The first issue that we want to thank him on is that he was able to give a feedback on the commitment made in the last State of the Province address. That's very important from where we are. The second part is their effort around fighting COVID, because our enemy number one, as we're standing here, is to defeat COVID. We are particularly interested on the issue of the rollout of the vaccination to our communities, because we want that rollout to impact on the ordinary people out there in the street. We need it most, whose life we must really save. But the other point is on the economic front. We are particularly impressed with the work that has been done, particularly around the Tshwane Special Economic Zone, particularly its focus on the SMMEs and the people in townships, but also the Special Economic Zone around Sidibeng and West Rand were more important than. On the front, on the issues of corruption, we are happy with actions that has been taken thus far. And as you listen, the Premier has committed that they will continue to fight corruption itself. On the issues of allegations against the Premier, all that we're saying is that until allegations are proven, there'll be little for us to say. Thus far, we're happy with his commitment around fighting corruption. We know that on PPEs, there's a case, a civil matter that is taking place in the court. We are looking at that matter closely. And we are saying, should anybody, whether you are the Premier or an MEC, be found on the wrong side of the law, we're not going to waste time, we'll take action.
Nzim Kumalo of the ANC, let's just thank you so much, sir, for your time. Let's just also bring in the IFP. Baba, we've heard what the Premier had to say. Are you happy, more especially with the vaccine rollout plan within the Gauteng province? We know that over 5,000 health workers have since been vaccinated.
Well, the speech was made under very difficult circumstances in a new normal where we've got different pandemics. It's the COVID-19, it's the ravaged economy, it's GPV, gender-based violence, and corruption. For us, those four issues that the Premier has mentioned, but there are no concrete plans to say how do we deal with them. He sounded like last year as far as the IFP is concerned, but at least we appreciate the fact that at least he has touched on those four issues. Thirdly, the issue that he has touched, that I think now we are happy that even government acknowledges what the IFP has been saying, that there is what we call urban poverty, and there are more than 3 million people who are living under the poverty line, and we need to do something about it. So the concrete steps that he has announced, we support, because we thought by last year the township economic bill will be on the table, and now we are promised that it is going to be in April. We are hoping, because we really need to deal with the red tape where our people cannot be able to have our businesses, because private sector and government could not create jobs so that we are able to deal with poverty.
Thank you so much for your time. So lastly, let's just bring in the representative of the ACDP here. We've heard what the Premier had to say. Quite interestingly so, I remember last year, when the Premier delivered his State of the Province address in Pretoria, he had outlined a 5-year plan to create 100,000 jobs. Now with COVID-19, it's affected the livelihoods of people. More people are now unemployed. There was no mention of that 5-year plan this year.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. I think what has happened here this morning is I think the Premier got his cue from the President, where they have a template where they say we will deal with 4 issues only. And the issues that they deal with doesn't really speak to the 5-year plan that we heard last year, which in essence says to us that we have a challenge and that the government, the executive of Gauteng has a great mammoth task to try and turn this ship around, because the morale of our people, the trust factor of our people has been eroded immensely. Eroded firstly because of the corruption that happens parallel with COVID-19, and the people of Gauteng cannot be happy with that. Secondly, the issue the Premier speaks about, 70% of lifestyle audits has been done with different departments. My question is, what is the result of, is all of them squeaky clean? There's no one that actually came out that we found, and yet billions have been lost. The issue, the positivity for me, is the issue of the economic bill that's going to come out for the revitalization of the township economy. I think that must be one of the priorities. The issue of crime in our societies, in our communities, the lawlessness that is taking place, that the Gauteng provincial government is to make sure that they attack these things and not just pay lip service to it. We hope that what he is saying here today will actually be enacted so that the people of Gauteng can actually feel. In closing, I don't sense that the speech actually touched the people on the ground. Sometimes it's just hypothetical big words being spoken and people can't relate to it. So we want the Premier to really come down in his detail to let the people understand what is it that's going to change their lives and give them a better life.
safe.
Thank you so much, Sen. Thank you for your time. Well, Arabile, in a nutshell, that was, all the various leaders of different political parties here in legislature. It's quite sad that the EFF is not here, but we shall try and actually give them a call to actually get their reaction of the State of the Province address. As you know that, this address is, under the new normal, Arabile, and, it's not like what we saw last year in Garanku at the Sefako Makhatho Medical Sciences University, where it was a hall full of, a lot of guests and various other political parties. This is how the SOPA is actually held under the new normal. But of course, we will get more reactions for you later on and update you as the SABC.
Natasha Phiri, thank you so much for that report then out in Johannesburg. Then, of course, after the Gauteng Premier David Makhura delivered his State of the Nation address, we appreciate that as well. Of course, we'll continue to check in on the story throughout the day. Very quick.